I'm really thrilled to be here. I'm humbled to be here that the pastor and Perry would entrust this opportunity for me to share with you. Today I'm going to share what I believe is possibly one of the most powerful messages that God has ever given me to share with the church. And I fought him for a long time about sharing this message because I felt like the church in America particularly wasn't particularly necessarily interested or ready for this message. And so about 3 years ago, the Lord just really began to impress it upon me, and other pieces of the message came together, and so I knew it was time to share. I went to my home church in St. Louis, Missouri. I am a full-time missionary. My wife and I have lived in Malaysia for the last 11 years, and so we have a home church in St. Louis, and I went to our pastor there, and I began to share some thoughts about this message with him. He said, wait a minute. And so he went and got some young people of the church, some of the young leaders in the church, and they came in, and I continued to talk about this message. And so a young man said, because I was seeking the name for the message, and this young man spoke out. He said, I think you should call this message Blessed. And I knew exactly what he was talking about because I was talking about the hardships and the problems that the persecuted church endure. And I hadn't really got to the heart of the message. And so I went ahead and called it Blessed because when we hear about the persecuted church, it's our first response. We think about how blessed we are. But I hope by the time I get through with this message, you will also realize how blessed they are. Amen? Today, I have the opportunity to speak to you on behalf of 200 million Christians. Imagine that. More Christians than there are in America. And all of those 200 million are being persecuted for their faith. They live in 40 different countries in the world, and it's illegal for them to own a Bible, to own even a portion of it written on a piece of paper, to raise their children as Christians, and or to even witness to other people. Knowing full well there could be persecution, many of these people still persist in their faith, and they meet with others and when they can, and they love to talk about Jesus. But knowing that they will face harassment, the loss of property, arrest, torture, rape. Some of them, they will not allow their children to marry with the other people in the communities. And in other cases, they come and kidnap a daughter and forcefully marry her into another not denomination, but into another faith. Many of the people that we work with are poor farmers. And so our teams or other people will go into that region, they'll preach the gospel, and the poor farmer and his family will accept Jesus, and perhaps many times they're in another region, but they come back to their home area, and they're so excited, they can't wait to tell everyone about Jesus, the pearl of great price that they have found. And so as they begin to share with people, not everyone is so excited to hear the news that they are sharing with them. And soon persecution comes, and it usually comes in a progression. And so here is a poor farmer. Under the best of circumstances, they have a horribly difficult life. And now they've become Christians. And now they have a joy that they've never had. But when they go to the merchants in their little village, now no one will sell them anything. And they produce crops on their farm, and they bring that to the village, and now no one will buy their crops. And soon what usually happens is people will get together in the village, and they decide, because of his opposition to our culture and to our people, we're not going to let them draw water from our well or our streams. And you just need to know that a farmer that can't sell anything and can't buy anything and has no water is in real trouble. But if he continues and believes that he is going to stay with his faith, many times, and sometimes the people that are doing the persecution are even their own family. But at night they will come and they will burn the crops, kill their livestock, and then if that's not enough, the ultimate price of being a Christian in some of these areas is to pay with your life. It's murder. Many people call it different names, but it's just murder. As I've gone into these areas, and I hear the statistics, and I hear missionologists continue to say this one thing, that where there is great persecution, there's great church growth. And I always think that can't be. It doesn't compute with my American mindset. Why would that be? And so I went on a journey. I began to think, why is it possible that the church is growing faster in the persecuted areas than it is the non-persecuted areas? I have been so blessed because on that journey, I've been able to go to many countries and in many churches, underground churches. And so I've been to India, Nepal, Philippines, Indonesia, Laos, China, Burma, Egypt, and then we have lived in Malaysia for 12 years. Malaysia, ironically enough, I've never had any major persecution there, but in the other places I have experienced or at least watched persecution happen to the people I was working with. My definition of the underground persecuted church is a fellowship of believers who continue to serve Christ even while under siege. War has been declared on them for reason beyond their control, and they are hated without reason. The persecuted church, I knew almost nothing about the persecuted underground church. As a matter of fact, when people talked about the underground church, I thought they were talking about people that met underground. You know, I didn't really know. I grew up in central part of Missouri, and I didn't have a very good education, honestly, about the things of the world and what was happening on other parts of the world. But these people, they meet when they can. They come together. They try to meet in boats or in homes, in basements, in caves. So some of them do meet underground. But the thing is they always are looking for a secluded, secure place in which to meet, because the government and even other Christians sometimes are looking for them to report them, to bring problems to them. I've watched these people, particularly in Vietnam. I remember watching some of the people I was with, and they were just right in the face of those who were persecuting them. They were sharing the gospel with them, even though the people were saying to them, you have to stop doing this. And they kept sharing the gospel. And I've seen this happen also in India and in Philippines. And I wonder sometimes, in the beginning, when I first started seeing this and going to these places, I wondered, why didn't they do like we do in America? I wondered, shouldn't I teach them how we do things in America so that they wouldn't be persecuted? In other words, you don't talk. You don't tell anybody. You don't share your faith. But they wouldn't listen to that. And I know they wouldn't listen to that, even if I tried to teach them. And of course, I'm teasing. I never really had that thought. But I did see them. And I did think, why do they have such a tenacity to share their faith? I've never known one person in my home country with that kind of tenacity, especially if someone's coming with authority to persecute me. What would I even do? Would I share my faith, or would I be quiet? I wanted to know why the church was growing so fast and in the persecuted areas. And so I felt like the Lord was leading me on a journey. And part of the journey took me to the early church. And so I began to study the history of the early church, and particularly the Apostle Paul. And I found that as the Apostle Paul had this powerful experience where God blinded him for 3 days, and for 3 days he couldn't see, and he was experiencing, I think, a powerful encounter with the Lord. And then Ananias prayed for him, and then the scales fell from his eyes. And the scripture says that he got up, he ate, he drank, and he went and preached the gospel. He had that kind of powerful experience with the Lord. He preached so powerfully and passionately that the first time he preached, it brought fire from the people in the government, and he was in trouble. And so the brothers came to him in Damascus, and they said, "Man, you're causing so much problems for us. We need to get you out of town." And so they let him out in a basket and over the wall. And so he went immediately to Jerusalem. And the same thing happened. He began to preach and preach powerfully and with passion and zeal. And so again, the brothers of the faith came to him and said, "Man, you're awesome, but we can't handle this kind of persecution yet. The church is just a baby. We can't handle that kind of persecution. We're going to ask that you go away." And so the scripture says he went to Tarsus, which was his hometown area, and he went there for 13 years. And so if you put all of this together, his experience in coming to know Jesus, and then his experience in going to the backside of the desert for 13 years, you come out with the fact that it was about 50 or 52 AD when Paul really started preaching and really started impacting the world. And you say, what difference does it make? What year that was? Well, I'm just glad you asked, and I'm now going to tell you. In 52 AD, a man named Nero became the Caesar of all of Rome. Historians say that he was certifiably insane when he became the Caesar. He declared immediately that he was God sent from the heaven to live as a man on the earth, and that every human being should worship him. Knowing full well that the Christians weren't going to worship him, he immediately passed a law that no matter who you were, if he was there or if other representatives of him came, you had to bow and you had to worship Caesar Nero. The soldiers could legally take your property. They could come and arrest you. They could brutalize you, torture you, and legally kill you. This was all legal. And then Nero began to have the Colosseums built. And how many of you have watched Gladiator? Oh, we got a lot of carnal Christians, right? I've watched it. We've all watched TV. I remember growing up, we couldn't watch TV.
We will resume this teaching after a short message from International School of the Word.
This teaching is one lesson taken from a full course on ISOW.org. If you are enjoying this video, we invite you to check out the full course in the links below. For the best value, try our All Access Pass. At just $99 per month, you can access thousands of hours worth of high-quality, world-class teaching. To check local pricing in your country, visit ISOW.org. For more great teachings like this, be sure to subscribe to this channel and follow us on our social media platforms.
Now, back to this teaching from International School of the Word.
We, in the Western world, we believe that the gladiators came to the Colosseum, and that's how it started. But really, Nero had the Colosseums built for one express purpose, and that was to kill Christians. Imagine that. So he sent ships and people clear to Africa to get wild animals to bring them back. They would arrest thousands of Christians and put them in the Colosseum and release lions and tigers and probably bears into the Colosseum to kill Christians. Then the gladiators came and finished off the rest of the Christians. But these were people that would not bow their knee to Nero. They would not say, yes, we're turning from Jesus and turning to Nero. They would not do it. And so it cost them their lives. Nero loved to do another thing, and that was he would have his soldiers go out at night, round up a group of Christians and bring them and have them soaked in tar or oil or wax. And then they had poles that lined the way to Nero's home. And they would tie Christians to those poles with this flammable substance and burn them alive at night to light up the pathway to Nero's home. He was certifiably insane. So that was all in 50 to 52, 54 AD. It's when the disciples were making a great impact on the world. Millions of people were coming to know Jesus. But even so, here's all this great persecution. Millions were coming, but thousands were being burned up or thrown in with the lions. One secular historian said that the blood in the Colosseum sometimes was ankle deep with Christians' blood. It was a terrible time. But unbelievably, the church was growing at such levels they couldn't contain it. They couldn't raise up leadership fast enough. So this is the context I want you to get with me. Before I read the scripture, you're all in Jerusalem. Actually you're in Rome. And you're out preaching the gospel. People are coming to know Jesus. You're training people. You're leading people. But every other person in this room tomorrow is either going to be set on fire or sent to the Colosseum. That's the kind of environment that these people faced. Imagine, here I am as a preacher, an evangelist, and I'm proclaiming to you, come to Jesus. And I give you all the reasons that we know that we should come to Jesus, but then I have to give a disclaimer. Oh, by the way, tomorrow you may be eaten by lions, or tonight you may be set on fire. You wouldn't think that the church would grow. You wouldn't think that that kind of persecution going on, that people would be responding. But that was the situation, as I'm about to read 1 Peter 4, 12 through 14. Dear friends, do not be surprised at the painful, fiery trial you are suffering, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice that you participate in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed. If you are insulted because of the name of Christ, you are blessed, for the Spirit of glory and of God rest upon you. Peter was writing to the people there in Rome, and so you're there in Rome and you're getting this letter, and Peter's full of joy. Well, where are you, Peter? Would have been my response, but we're in trouble here. But he was responding to the fact that he knew the people were full of joy and were honored and appreciated even, that they were counted among the elect, that they got to know Jesus. You know, this message that I'm sharing with you today, I've had to think about this many times as I go out into places that have never heard the gospel. And I have to realize that some of the places I go, I may preach to someone that day and know that their family may hate them forever, or they may actually have to pay for this with their life. And so for a long time it was very heavy on me. And I was challenged. What do I do? And I knew what I had to do. I knew what I was called to do. But sometimes it's a heaviness. I have found out the reason, I believe, why the church is growing in the persecuted areas. And why it grew so fast in the early church. And why it's grown fast in every culture where there's great persecution since 2,000 years. The early church and the persecuted church of today all believe the one common thing is that if they were to die for Jesus today, they would be instantaneously with him in heaven. And isn't that where we all want to be? A few years ago, I had an opportunity to go hunting. Don't hold that against me. I'm not here advocating hunting. I'm not here to debate it, but I'm here to just say I had an opportunity to go to Colorado and hunt a bull elk. And I was on horseback, and I pulled my rifle out, and I had a beautiful trophy elk just 100 yards away. And I pulled that out, and I shot, and I knew instantly that I had missed this elk. My guide was not very happy. I was not very happy. Some of you are very happy. So I put the gun back in the scabbard. That's a leather pouch that holds your rifle on a horse. And a few weeks later, I came back to Missouri, and I handed that gun to my nephew. I said, there's something wrong with this gun. It was off so far. I knew I didn't even come close to this elk. So he took it out, and he shot the gun, and he said, Uncle Jim, it's off 12 feet at 100 yards. Well, you can't hit a barn with that. And so I began to look at the scope, and I realized the screw was loose, and one screw was totally gone. And I feel like that is what's happened with the church today, is that we have a screw loose. You know, our scope is no longer focused on Jesus. As a matter of fact, I think some of us have taken all the screws out and turned the scope around, and it appears that everything is about me. It's about us. It's about what we want. It's about what God should do for us. I've even seen in the newsstands, there's a book that a pastor wrote, and I'm not against him. I'm just saying the title of the book hit me hard. But it says, live your best life now. Well, either he knows another story that I don't know. I mean, you know, it doesn't compute with me. My best life is yet to come. Even if I would become a multi-billionaire on this earth, my best life is yet to come. And that's what I found with these beautiful people in Underground Church. They're full of joy. They have a joy that I had never experienced in our Western church culture. A few years ago, I was asked to go to the Underground Church service in Vietnam, and they said, Pastor, if you'll come, we want you to wear this helmet, and if you have a jacket, we want you to wear a jacket. And I knew right away they wanted me to look like I was a Vietnamese. And I also knew that I was never going to look like a Vietnamese. But they said, if you'll be out in front of the hotel at 7 o'clock, there'll be a man on a blue motorcycle. He'll come by, he'll pick you up, and he'll take you to the destination. So I like to be places early, and so I was out there at 6:30, and I was still out there at 7:30, and I think it was about 8:30 when they arrived, and a man came up on a blue motorbike. I'm standing up 3 or 4 steps higher than he was, and he pointed at me and as if I'm supposed to come get on this motorbike. And it was a 90cc motorbike. And I figured really quick that I was probably going to overload this little motorbike. But he kept insisting, And I was also a little apprehensive because it was a blue motorbike, and I had been there almost 2 hours, and I'd probably counted 3,000 blue motorbikes. So I wasn't even sure this was the right motorbike to get on. But he insisted, and so finally I got on the bike. We take off, and within about 20 minutes into the journey, we're sitting at a stoplight, and he indicates that he wants me to get on the bike next to us. Well, I don't think I want on that bike. I'm not sure the guy I'm with is the right guy. But reluctantly and eventually I did it, and I got on that bike and we took off, and we're going down the road, and we come to another stoplight 15 minutes later. And the same thing happens. And so that guy wants me to get on another man's bike. And so finally that happened 4 times. We finally arrived at our destination. It's dark. No lights anywhere, no flashlights turned on. And I'll just go ahead and tell you so I don't forget. The reason they had done that on the motorbikes is to try to avoid being detected by the police and the government people. So they were trying to keep me safe. And so we arrive at this place. It was dark. You could kind of make out the image of buildings. And my driver and I began to walk, and soon I knew that there were other people with us. And I don't know where they came from, but eventually I found that they were the other drivers. And they had gone different directions trying to take the government soldiers different places so that they wouldn't be able to find us.
Thank you so much for supporting our ministry. If this has blessed you, please say a prayer for us. And if you would like to give, we have 3 ways that you can do that. You can give online at isow.org/donate, or text the word GIVE and the amount to 423-225-9022. That's 423-225-9022. You can also give through the mail at ISOW, 340 Paul Huff Parkway, Northwest, Cleveland, Tennessee, 37312. Thank you. God bless you, and may the Lord multiply your seed. Now back to this teaching from the International School of the Word.
I remember as we approached the front door, the driver that I was with, he knocked on the door, and it was a secret code, and it was very quiet. He just kind of tapped on the door, and the door opened, and those 4 Vietnamese men just slid right into that doorway, and I just stood there. I didn't know we had to do this quick and quiet, and I'm just an American. I don't know where I am. I don't understand how dangerous this is. And so I felt like someone reached out and grabbed me, and they pulled me into the room. And I remember thinking, this can't be church, because my Western church culture is saying, there's none of the trappings here that we have to have for it to be church. As I began to look around, there was just only one little bitty light bulb dropped out from the ceiling. It was maybe a 15 or 20 watt bulb. And as I looked around, there was no chairs, there was no other lighting, there was no pulpit, there was no projector, there was no cameras, no sound system, no instruments, no big screen TV, no carpeting, no coffee bar. None of the things that we feel like we have to have in the Western church culture. There was no cross on the building or in the building. But what I did see was there was about 100 people gathered in this room. And I could see that in front of some of the people there were little like dark spots on the concrete. And later I found that they were tears. That these people had been there. Many of those people had walked in that day. Many of them up to 30 miles had walked, had come into that building discreetly and randomly. No 2 or 3 of them came at one time, because they were trying to keep this a very low-key meeting. They didn't want people to know that we were even there. And I'll never forget, it was time for the worship, and a little gal came up to the front. I mean, she could have done it from any part of the room, but they told me she was going to lead worship now. And so again, my Western church culture kicked in, and like, yes, we're going to have praise and worship now, and I'm going to be inspired to preach the gospel. I'm going to be fired up, as if we need that. But she began to sing, and there was no noise. And she continued to sing. They sang 3 or 4 songs. No one made a noise. There were 100 people there. There were children, old people. Nobody went out to the toilet. No one coughed. There was no noise at all. You would have never known there was one person in that building, much less 100. And I'll never forget, she began to sing another song, and she began to clap her hands. And again, no noise. Some of them do it like this, but this group was just putting their hands together like that. And then it was testimony time, and all these people would tell about their testimony and how people had been persecuting them and how they had forgiven them and how they're praying for their persecutors that they might come to know Jesus. And then I remember at different times that evening, at different times I thought, at any moment the government soldiers could break in here. And they could take us all prisoners. Because what we're doing here, we're really breaking the law. We're really bad people because we love Jesus. I found that these people were worshiping for eternity. They weren't thinking about their house that they were going to build, or their boat that they were going to buy, or their Mercedes, or their bank accounts, their savings accounts. These people were just genuinely there just to worship Jesus, and they didn't even know when they would ever be able to meet again. They would never meet in that building again, and they just didn't know because they don't have those kind of freedoms. And I've often said that I love the way they worship because symbolically, I don't recall if they really do this, but symbolically, I came away with the thought that they worship like this. As if to say, God, we're coming to give our entire life to you. Rather than in the Western church, of course, you know how we come. Gimme, gimme, gimme. I'm coming today, and the pastor better have a powerful word for me, or I'll be going somewhere else, and the worship better be fantastic, and on and on and on. And if all that lines up, we'll give our $3 in the offering. And so that was the other thing in that location. I'll never forget the offering they took. And the people came up with an egg or a handful of rice or cocoa beans or coffee beans, just giving what they had. I love the fact when you're in those environments, Pastor, that the people, you just don't see people's faces because they are looking down and they're taking notes. Even though it may cost them. If they get caught with those notes, they could be in trouble. But they come to a meeting not for themselves. They come to gather some knowledge and some time with other believers, but they want to take that knowledge back and share it with their family and their friends. A few years ago, I was with Pastor Jack in a meeting in Vietnam, and a lady was leading that meeting. And she says to Pastor Jack, would you come to Vietnam and hold a meeting for 300 of the top leaders in our country? 27 different denominations. And Jack and I looked eye to eye immediately, and we're both thinking exactly the same thing. And she said, "Oh, I know what you're both thinking. You're thinking what would happen if the government would come and arrest all those people. You're thinking that the church would die in Vietnam." She said, "I'll never forget this." She stood up and she said, "I just want you to know that our whole country is a prison, and we will preach the gospel on this side of the prison bars or on that side of the prison bars. But we will preach the gospel and the church will grow." I thought she was crazy. I'm like, how can she be so bold to make that kind of statement? It was only maybe a few months later. I didn't even know immediately, but a few months later, I found that it was her husband that had just been released from prison, and he had been in prison like 3 years and was very ill, had been tortured, and was now out of prison. And while he was in prison, their church movement grew by thousands of people. I don't remember now exactly how many people. But she knew what she was talking about. These people believe and live with the thought that they have a mission in life, a mission on the earth, and that mission is to proclaim Jesus to everyone, even to those who persecute them and could even cause their death. I remember many times hearing in different countries, but the first time I heard it was in Vietnam, when the people would say, "Please don't pray against persecution. Please tell the church in America not to pray against persecution." And I remember the first time I heard that, I'm like, I don't know of any church in America that's praying for you or not. The persecuted church. But they thought the whole country was spending day and night praying for them. And so I was humbled and I was broken. But why would they say, "Please don't pray against persecution"? And so I went to the Lord and I prayed about that for a long time. And I finally felt like the Lord showed me that if a man or a woman will come out into the jungle and stand up on a tree stump or anything that would elevate them and begin to preach the gospel, that people would come, and the people that would come would also know that this person is risking their life to preach the gospel. And you know, when that happens, the value of the message is escalated. The value of the message goes from a 10 to 200. People want to know what you know when you're willing to risk your life to share it with them. That's why the church in the persecuted areas grows, and they can't contain it. Just yesterday I saw something on the internet. Jack's wife posted it, that in Vietnam they had arrested 100 pastors and they were considering killing them, poisoning them. This is not a game, but I'm telling you, no question that the church grows and it's purified by persecution. Do I want it? Absolutely not. But is it valuable for the church? Without question. Acts the 5th chapter, verse 40 and 42. It says, "And they agreed with him. And when they had called for the apostles and had beaten them, then they commanded that they should not speak in the name of Jesus, and they let them go. So they departed from the presence of the council, rejoicing that they were counted worthy to suffer shame for his name. And daily in the temple and in every house they did not cease teaching and preaching Jesus as the Christ." Isn't that awesome? They had just been beat. They told them, they chastised them, make sure you don't do this anymore. And they go out from the council and they go immediately to share the gospel. Many of the people have told me that they were so honored to be persecuted, and they've asked me to pray for them that they would live a life so honoring unto the Lord that they might be worthy of being persecuted. 2 Timothy 3:12 says, yes, all who desire to live godly in Jesus Christ will suffer persecution. Some of these wonderful people have told me that daily they pray and they ask the Lord, have I lived worthy today? Have I been worthy enough to receive persecution? And some of them say, as they go to bed that night, if they haven't been persecuted that day, they feel like they haven't lived up to what they want to. They want to bring glory and honor to the Lord. In the past, I have pridefully and arrogantly, probably, said that I would give my life for the Lord. Well, I don't believe Jesus is going to ask most of us to give up our life for Him. But He is asking that we all live for Him. And if we won't live for Him, we're sure not going to die for Him. The things I have learned from the persecuted church have transformed my life. I'm bolder. I'm not intimidated when I'm in Walmart and someone needs to be prayed with. I preach bolder. I'm stronger when I go into these countries where I know that it's against the law to preach the gospel. My wife and I have, by watching these precious saints, my wife and I have prioritized our life accordingly. And so in the last 10 years, and this is not a message at all on how to have a good marriage, okay? But we agree on these things. And in the last 11 years, we've spent 7 anniversaries apart, many birthdays apart, not by design, but because we felt like there were more important things that we needed to be doing for the gospel. So these people who give their whole life for the Lord and have a joy that's unspeakable will transform your life. A few years ago, I came back from being with the persecuted church. And as I came back to America, and it's hard sometimes as a missionary to come back and see the churches and people living the way we live, and I'm guilty as well. When I come back to America, I become very American. But the Lord began to challenge me on Genesis 22. And it's the story we all know so well, the story of Abraham and Isaac, and they were climbing the mountain. God had asked Abraham to offer up Isaac as a sacrifice to him. And so I'm sure Abraham was reluctant, but finally he said, yes, we'll go. And so they're climbing the mountain. And as they're climbing the mountain, Isaac says to his father, Father, I see the fire, and I feel the wood on my back, but where is the lamb? And I felt like the Lord dealt with me for a long time on that scripture, and I believe that this was the revelation that He gave me. And it was this, that the wood is symbolic of all of the great church buildings that are in this country and in other Western countries. Great buildings with big screens and big lighting and thick carpeting and plush chairs and, all of the things, all of the trappings, the Western trappings where we come to be entertained in church. And then I felt like He was saying that the fire is all of the charismatic preaching and the great worship that goes forth in many churches throughout our country. And they have the big screens. They have big sound system. They have millions of dollars worth of sound equipment. And so that was the fire. But I felt like the Lord told me that many of those churches with the great fire and the great wood don't have the Lamb. And He told me that the people I had been out with in the persecuted church, they had the Lamb. They'll never have the fire. They don't even know about the fire and the wood. But they have the Lamb. And I believe, my friends, today, and I want to make sure you understand, there is nothing wrong with the great buildings. There's nothing wrong with the great worship. Only if those buildings and that great worship doesn't go with the Lamb. But we need to be seeking the Lamb. And that's what I find in the persecuted church. They seek only the Lamb. And they have a joy unspeakable. There was a man in India that came to know Jesus. Very similar to the story I began this message with. He was out in the rural village, a farm people, and he accepted Jesus. And he and his family came back to their village, and this was back in the 1880s. So they came back to their village, and they began to tell everyone about Jesus. They were so excited. And the leaders of the village came to him and said, "You need to stop telling people about Jesus. Even if you want him, just be quiet, because we like you." But he said, "I can't. I cannot do that. I believe that I am called to tell people about Jesus." And so the day came that they went and gathered this man and his family, and they brought them to the center of the village. And they said, "This day, you must stop preaching about Jesus." Because this was a radical Hindu part of India. It was totally closed to the gospel. They said, "If you don't stop preaching about Jesus today, we're going to kill your children with a bow and arrow." And so he's like, "I've decided to follow Jesus." And so they killed his children. And then they brought his wife forward and they said, "Now, if you don't stop talking about Jesus, we will kill your wife." He said, I can't stop talking about Jesus because I have decided to follow Jesus." And so they killed his wife. And they're like, "We like you. You're a great part of this community. We don't want to do this to you. But if you don't stop talking about Jesus today, we will have to kill you." He said, "I have decided to follow Jesus, even though there is none that goes with me. I have decided to follow Jesus." And so they killed him. And the legend is that the man who actually orchestrated this believer's death, the leader of the village, went back to that man's home and found the writings that this man had done about Jesus and their faith and how they had decided to follow Jesus. And somehow that man was so touched and transformed by this young martyr's family that he accepted Jesus. And then the whole village accepted Jesus. Then the whole region accepted Jesus. And still today in Assam, India, the majority of people there are Christians because of that man's faith. And you have heard the song many, many times, "I have decided to follow Jesus." George Beverly Shea sang it in every one of Billy Graham's crusades as the altar call. "I have decided to follow Jesus." It's a powerful story. It's a powerful story of how God used one family to reach a whole region that was unreachable, totally closed, totally dangerous for people to even go there and share the gospel. It was called a missionary graveyard. And India has many of them. As I close, I just want to read one thing to you. We as the Free Church should be responding to the cry of the persecuted church. We are their voice, united in telling their story and standing with them through prayer, resources, and advocacy. As they suffer for the sake of the gospel, we strive to follow their lead in unashamedly sharing our faith with those around us, refusing to give up in freedom what they, our brothers and sisters, are not willing to give up under persecution. We choose to live our lives in a way that we may strengthen them and bring honor to the Lord.